Um, so I was this morning, uh, pitch a false dichotomy, I guess, in regards to, you see, were it to be the case that my controversies with me going back to the start of last decade had caused any kind of ripple or division between the two co-founders of Capital Chemists, which it might be in their interest to represent, because I understand them having that poofter, well, oh, if this was Gary's fuck up, we're so sorry, but Roger can tend to your every need. Oh, sorry, is this Roger's fuck up? Conversely, his business partner Gary had no idea, but he would love to tend to your every need. And why I pissed them off, essentially, I could be on a breeding machine with no limbs, and Gary would still consider me to be one to be saying, "Oh, to whom you want to say it? What you talk like you think you're so fucking tough now, do you?" Um, like motherfucker, and have my L's. All I've pointed out is that 16th century uh, innovators that thought they were cool to be pre-Renaissance, pre-Enlightenment, um, by applying a little reversal to the theology of the Christian poison and go, well, if we hail the devil instead, then we'll always. I mean, I guess it's like the idea of devil's advocate and the role of devil's advocate coming up, and uh, as an attorney might play in a trial, tracing back to. And there are some valid points here, but they're all mythologically grounded. There's not etymologically, the term Satan in Hebrew was referred to the word opponent. So there's a lot of evidence, as I said, slavery permeates both testaments of the Bible. So to make to be nonconformist back then was much more horrid and likely to get you killed than is now. At least in a swift and fast way. But so the word and the Church of Satan are actually the ones to show up Freemasonry in this regard and say, well, yeah, we don't consider Satan an anthropomorphic being like the theological god of the monotheisms. It's just an archetype or an ideal for nonconformity and the opposition of viewpoints of the status quo and questioning. So there's some ancient Greek Socratic elements tied up in that too. But I suppose being an adversary to points of views or an opponent of points of views would be possible without questioning mine either. Because he's got a lot of pride hinged on this fusion, he's doing the same things as this pretty upper self idiot woman that published a book once for sale at a Christian bookshop in Woden called The Harmony of the Gospels. And she's actually going against what the assemblers of the Bible freely admit to. Why is it a stated interpolation that marks chapter 16 after Jesus killing through to, I think it's 16 verse 9.
Morning, police at my door. Fresh Adidas squeaky.
I mean, in all the times that I knew him, I felt a sense of being over-empathized and over-sympathized toward, which I didn't understand until quite some time later, because I was told contradictory information on two fronts earlier on in the career. Was that Capital Chemists would be running a police check on me. Later was advised not to confer with police officers. And then in the middle of that, a pharmacist coming to me saying, Roger does this work in cooperation with police and assist police interests, and so Gary Cairns, I get that. I talked about sheep in a speech I recorded last night just say, well, it's indisputable scientific proof of at least one other species that have demonstrated homosexuality. We obviously know that they don't listen to our mythologies or our English, and they require corporal treatment, physical handling methods just to get in line. But with it seems that what the Freemasons have done is they have said that, well, the Jesus Christ story is a recipe of a martyr, but what that involves them to do is to take and harmonize all four of these gospels together, which just don't fucking fit together. Like, say they do, they don't. And the only other group of people, even amongst all the different denominations of branch off Christians, is that a lot of them are stepping up, going, yeah, these weren't written by, like, for the equivalent of journalists from 4 different media stations following Jesus and his disciples around, getting word for word recordings of and interviews, and you see the trend pan out from. It's admitted, John Cleese, spoke about how pissed he was at learning certain things later on after getting a 10th rate version of Christianity that made him really pissed off, and he nonetheless creatively expressed through films like Life of Brian. But so none of them are really known to be that there was a Saint Mark, a Saint Matthew, a Saint Luke, and a Saint John. What's more likely is that names were slapped on in association with various gospel scribes, and that as time progressed, they were more intimidated, really, that their own safety back then would have been an incentive, an impetus to write things as preferred. But what Mark does show, as I said, that the gradient progresses from the oldest to the more recent, showing increase in attestations of supernatural miracle performances, the rising from the dead, the confirmed confession, which is not confirmed in Mark's gospel, and Bishop Spong says he didn't confess. He felt led perhaps by the question is one point of contention, where I bring up and I tried to touch on addressing this innate concept of oxymoronic nonsense entailed in the word supernaturalism, and that's because what can be implied when they try and say it means to be going into the conceptual world beyond that of what's known about nature. Point A is that you can't really say that to be true 2,000 years in the past, because that's even before thinking that bleeding you with leeches would treat you of any one of an assortment of ailments, where it's now considered just ridiculous to bleed anybody with leeches altogether, and that's some centuries before that practice was even acceptable to medical practitioners to begin with. So you find a man who's like the other increase, and it's one that I was going to write about more, that you don't see pointed out too much by atheists, even ex-Christian deconvert atheists, when contrasting the Gospels, and that is that Jesus' teachings, as the books, that the later Gospel books that include more miracle stories, they also include more of him gathering his disciples and teaching them teachings that could be construed or could make you as you read them, you'd turn off going, yeah, it's so easy to understand why they would have killed him on a human level back in that time in history, given the nature of the things that he was saying. But that there's not even that level of, even if a counter-fascist vitriolic thread that was certainly, by today's standards, excusable. You don't really see that much occurring in Mark, where he's talking, doesn't even mention God all that much, really, and he's got the metaphor, Son of Man. So without trying to be placative, it's almost like speaking in these parables, so that it prompted people to think more without him being too over domineering a leader, and yet it's that sort of precise political overtaking that the later Gospels say were, on a naturalistic level, the contributing factors to his execution. Now, that's incidentally where they have him proudly confessing to this charge to be the King of the Jews, and that was so. What I say, and why I bring up this supernaturalism can really mean a lot of things, none of which are all natural questions answered, and now we're delving into beyond natural answers, because things just a few hundred years ago that were explained in supernatural terms, it meant beyond our understanding. So we offer this type of understanding, but it'll probably be overwritten by scientist Galileo. For what Galileo had to write, he's only declared the heresy charges by the Vatican. The Catholic Church were only dropped against him in 1992. So that's quite some time after his death, really. I'm sure. Do you think he got that message and said, "Oh, thanks, Vatican"? I'm glad. It's so nice. It means so much to me now to know that you don't consider me a heretic anymore. But so what I know that their ideas of a martyr is that they have all these ideological causes, ideals for which they would want to recruit a following, die for the cause. I've also heard them use some miracle terms, like a person who gives up without a fight, even though they've got a certain amount of corporate muscle, where it's certainly strenuous on willpower, and that it'd be fair to say you're trying to push someone to suicide while saying, and self-harm, just so that you can get a report lodged to that effect, and then try once again marshal them into psychiatric facilities. Now, so what's ignored, and these are the ones, like it's these people who think that they can be compatibilists and take a scientific qualification and knowledge of scientific method or the history of the rising of science, and then but then these Freemasons, and so they've been good scientists who have been accomplished, while at the same time crediting a religious belief system that, if they were to bring it to its claims and assertions to the scrutiny of a court hearing or a scientific laboratory, it would be ruled out as unscientific and implausible at the same time. Those people annoy me when they become public figures, because invariably their scientific achievements get miscredited by apologists as if they were some sort of edifying proof of why whatever religion they belong to is true, and that the apologist has therefore waived their onus to bring forward evidence in support of the claims, and that can be even argumentative evidence, but they'll avoid that as best that they can. But so if you can just picture it back on a socio-political level, where you had the king and queen both raised proudly and groomed for the one to marry the other, and here this is pre-pride and prejudice even, a queen will treat her king in such and such a way, and they're the ruling class, and they're proud of their keeping their bloodlines pure, which is to say of their ongoing practice of incest. Which is why I think that the original papyrus scribes to stipulate that the whole world owes its existence to incest is probably just was manuscripts that ancient kingdom had that survived. The manuscript survived, and none of the commoners had access to either papyrus manuscript or the means to write about their own stories. But yeah, if you want to think about instinctively what sort of person in today's terms are they going to charge at if you had an inbred king and an inbred queen, and then they're watching, and the one element that people say is consistent, the one harmonizing quality of what's written in it seems genuine enough to an extent with Jesus' words and his use of poetry and the kind of thinking that goes into parable, poetic, the sort of poetic cut. Is that and that element of opposites attract in is the difference between the criminal offender and the one they mistreat. So a kingdom owned by proud inbreeders, who would they want to play against that wasn't harming anyone? And in my submission, that is first century unrecognized bisexual. And why in the 21st century is bisexuality arguably still the more marginalized sexual health identity, even within this LGBT community. And I think it's because of the faith in the Christ as a supernatural figure is why the naturalistic components of this man's story are under-addressed. Because what do they mean by beyond nature? Like it was beyond nature back then, but now it's not. Now it can't be naturally addressed, and this doesn't have anything to do with what clearly must be legislators on sexual health identity, backed by principles of the religious right, or at least more sympathetic to the religious right and what it stands for than to secular. What's left out by the Religious Discrimination Act is the way that they'll stress its arc being about sensitivity to all religions. But if that were true, you would find conflicts of interest emerging in Catholic schools where they are saying, teach that the earth also could be resting on the back of a giant tortoise, or get your Eden God's image stories out of there. You're not being sensitive enough or fair to religions. So those sort of talks that are hypocritical of the religious right don't occur, and nor do talks about the marginalization of the non-religious or secular community either. And so yeah, while that trait of a loving nature, and I consider that you're looking at a situation of a ransom, kidnap, murder, suicide, that if talked about more in those terms would have led to you see like trickles of it in Diana's death, and then Buckingham didn't think that the people would want to see them hoist the flag it shows how far they've come, really, the Queen being head of the Church of England and the armed forces. But back 2 millennia ago would obviously have been even worse. So if the obliteration of the Christ as this supernatural and therefore undefinable figure is used as a kind of black hole for everyone to use and dump their emotional baggage on, and it's what I don't like to go into. I make no secrets about my childhood if asked, and about any point in time of my life, I will uh, and prefer to in person. I'd be interviewed by someone else or ask specific questions by someone else. But it's not that I'm. I don't think. I think if there's one thing I've proved by this point, it's that I'm not. I'm not expressionally closed off. Um, but yeah, you're essentially what the person who thinks that these pagan miracle stories, which Apollonius of Tyana's ability to additionally walk through walls to raising the dead and curing the blind and casting out demons and turning water into wine, that particular miracle seems to go back to Dionysius, 1500 BC. Is that essentially this character impressed them so much that they, and I can see a convergence of forces too. Like you would not you would not be able to say King Herod and whatever your particular queen you have, you're a couple of inbred psychos. But you can see why, if that was their psychological makeup, and this is exactly what I think the Christians are bringing on themselves for thinking they can say that religion inspired them to a career in psychology, because there's no way you'll watch them skirt the issue and go, well, Adam and Eve was a metaphor, and like, so what's God then? Like a figure of speech or an expletive of once they like to dabble in and dip their feet in both ponds, so to speak, they burn out. They prove that there's stuff that they've not. They prove two things: that there's an assortment of stuff that they are not willing or making themselves confront for the sake of personal integrity, and they're debunking their own religion and unearthing it as a sickness, which I don't have problem with them doing, but until they realize that as the law has it, a child is taught certain things about custom for asking, showing an interest in a prospective partner. That in my case would require certain conversations to have transpired and exchanges between my father of birth and myself that have never happened. And assigned to my mother's defense from kindergarten onwards, she'd come to recognize me as having a sort of shared guardian defensive stance for the most part in relation to her. So she never... she never guided me either. So my discovery was that, well, yeah, I think, and while I credit as an artist Bowie and Patti Smith with their collective 60s team up against stereotypes and making waves with the bisexual rights movement, I really think that it's a movement that would have been the norm already, or part of the norm, if it weren't for supernaturalist Christianity. But yeah, what's a real joke is that Gary Cairns, and their definition of a gay person is a man whose responsibility comes from the rebellion against their own sexuality. It's someone. Yes, it is admittingly a definition. A bigoted definition, and a weak-minded bigoted definition offered from the member of a gentleman's club who hasn't really thought things through and is still trying to imply that gay men in Australia should be tipping their hat to the workings of religious people who no one ever asked for them to meddle or stick their nose in our businesses anyway. But if the definition even implies like, oh, so to be gay, you have to rebel against your own nature all the time, or you're not really gay. That's what their definition is saying, and it's not even defining them, gay people, in a positive sense, where, for instance, same-sex attraction is even mentioned. It tries to be technical while pandering to heterosexuality as stipulated by the religious right as being the norm, from which the homosexual community are a oddity digression. And it's not to any credit to them or to identify uniqueness in them. It's saying from our religiously bigoted point of view, you look to be at odds with yourselves, and then they go and do it and think they can abduct. I mean, in terms of systematic child abuse, I didn't know. I was speaking out on this topic. I didn't know what the term was, but if it's still apparently an offence for someone to have understood you to have suffered certain losses in your childhood, and then to go, they can't just go, now that you're over the age of consent, we'll hammer at you as if you are under over these matters, because you don't to some point of invincibility overcome your difficulties while growing up, just because you're recognized as an adult legally. And so systematic abuse in that respect, Gary Cairns and Roger Tall they're the team up, and they're the ones rebelling when they do these contrived, oh, sorry if Roger didn't mistreated you as a patron. The business partner Gary will come along and make everything all right. That's them doing the rebelling against one another's sexuality, and I would call that more. That's why I'm keen to reintroduce the term faggots as a pejorative, because really you can use any word in the pejorative sense. So why leave these terms out? But it's not to be taken to say I don't support rights of sexual health identifications as a in principle. To my mind, and I stand unchallenged on this debate as well, is that to my mind, I've seen, and I don't identify as homosexual, but I've heard Roger Tall, after promising not to contact me outside of work shift, do so invasively while I'm trying to essentially appeal to some much needed therapy at that point in time. And if there was any time I really did not need to hear from him, it would have been then, since he's fucking spastic at even mediating staff problems. So, when I go back to saying I could have my limbs all blown off and be in a wheelchair, and Gary will go, oh, look what you think you're so tough now, just because I'm the one who's aware of the datings of the Gospels in the Christian's New Testament than the Freemasons are. Well, that's because you've made some stupid decisions in your to not be revisionist or open to revisionism, is to call yourself, in principle, concerning your analysis and interpretation of scriptures, is to define yourselves as idealistically complete and have all the answers, when you absolutely know that's antithetical to science, and that's antithetical to enlightened spiritualists as well. So all that then does leave you with is unrelated notoriety and status built up from the raising of capital, which means that, once the phantom of why you think you're ethical and able to tell who martyrs are, you can't even hear questions in people's songs because of your stupid chants and your greed to sell and trade more antipsychotic profiles. You're taking people's lyrics and trying to represent them as the commands from the non-existent supernatural beings that you've never got to hear from. So it's not our job to pay for your resent that you feel in your hearts because your deities don't exist. But no, they're a team. Roger, with Roger's voice failing to break and sounding like a pubescent a beginning fringe pubescent teen of around age 12, 13. I'm convinced, and without the psych training and licenses that he has, and kidnapping his own staff while they're still technically on the books, involving them in sociological studies for which against their consent, and him doing that with no psych license that he neither presents to his staff, while lying to staff about him having valid and in-date military qualifications, is just fucking depraved. And that he moves from Tasmania to the mainland to do that here in Canberra. I say he fingered his mum to the point that, or touched her vagina to the point that he gained a sexual thrill from it, and his voice just didn't get the depth that he gets to enjoy the resonance of from Gary Cairns' voice to him when they're sucking each other and often fucking each other. That'll do.